low vision, or have another print disability, which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dan, and for the next hour I'll be reading from the March 7th and March 8th, 2026 edition of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition, this on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And starting off on the front cover, lots of news today. Trump's Iran Endgame Shifts by Alex Leary and Vera Bergengruen. Washington. President Trump demanded Iran's unconditional surrender and the selection of leadership he finds acceptable, signaling on Friday a larger role in the country's future less than a week after urging Iranians to, quote, take over your government. The rapid shifts continue to muddle the administration's endgame in Iran and raise the stakes for Trump, who built his America First movement on the promise of avoiding foreign entanglements. If he now seeks to dictate the political outcome of a country of 92 million in the world's most combustible region. The changing rationales have exposed the stark contrast between the months-long planning that went into the initial military assault and what one senior administration official characterized as minimal conversation about who would take over the country. This is partly by design, allowing Trump to keep the U.S. strategy fluid to adjust to the latest military and political developments on the ground, the official said. The White House has cast the joint operation with Israel, which has killed dozens of regime members, including Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, as an overwhelming military success. The operation struck more than 3,000 targets and damaged or destroyed 43 Iranian ships in a matter of days, said with Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth declaring the firepower is set to, quote, surge dramatically. Yet, there have been cascading consequences from the disruption of shipping through the Strait of Hormuz to the panicked scramble to evacuate U.S. citizens from the region as Iran launched retaliatory strikes. Days into the conflict, the White House was still weighing whether to arm Kurdish militias, work through regime insiders, or anoint a preferred successor. Even as Trump called outside advisors and journalists to bounce off ideas, aides were still settling on a rationale. There was no process here, no ground game, which takes months and months of preparation, said Aaron David Miller, a Middle East expert who has advised several presidents. There was no sense of, once you drop the stone in the pond, what the ripples would be. The White House denied Trump was shifting objectives and that unconditional surrender is when he determines Iran is no longer a threat to the U.S. It also said Trump has taken steps to ensure safe passage of tankers and freeing up sanctioned oil to alleviate pressure on the global market. It also pointed to travel alerts the State Department issued in the region before the attack and pointed to efforts including charter and military planes that have returned more than 24,000 U.S. citizens. The president and his entire national security team are on the ball, monitoring every impact of Operation Epic Fury and immediately addressing challenges as they may arise, said White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt. Above all, the president and his team remain laser-focused on the long-term objectives of this operation, the total obliteration of a terrorist regime that has threatened our country for nearly 5 decades. That was a quote from Caroline Leavitt. Even as the war has metastasized into regional crisis that has drawn in more than a dozen countries, Trump still appears to be refining the reasons for the war and its endgame on the fly, according to current and former U.S. officials and allied diplomats. Trump's announcement on Friday that there will be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender, ! And that he wants a role in selecting a leader who is, quote, acceptable to the U.S., drew the latest red line, narrowing potential diplomatic off-ramps and potentially sinking the U.S. into the kind of nation-building role Trump has vowed to avoid. The uncertainty over the U.S. goals in Iran, backed by its largest military buildup in the region since 2003, carries significant risks, analysts and former officials said. The unclear timetable could mean more U.S. casualties, 6 U.S. troops have already died, as well as a growing bill for taxpayers, global economic shocks, and deeper strain on U.S. munitions stockpiles that the defense industry might struggle to replenish quickly. Trump said that big U.S. weapons makers had agreed to raise production of military munitions after a White House meeting Friday. The unanswered questions from the White House have armed critics who have said Trump and his circle failed to plan for the fallout from the strikes. Trump, however, shrugged off those concerns. Forget about next, Trump told ABC News on Thursday. They are decimated for a 10-year period before they could build it back, referring to Iran's nuclear program. 6 days after U.S.-Israeli strikes killed Khamenei and dozens of other senior Iranian officials, U.S. officials haven't identified a viable successor to engage with and remain unsure who will emerge in charge in Tehran. For now, the big country is being led by an interim 3-man council comprising 2 hardline clerics and the country's president until the Assembly of Experts selects a successor. The president would like to see a more cooperative government, said Gregory Brew, a senior Iran analyst at Eurasia Group. But nobody has thought through how that happens, and nobody's really grappled with the reality that even weakened, the Islamic Republic is likely to survive. Trump is brushing that off, but it's going to have a significant ramification for the region and the U.S. Trump has reveled in the images and videos of celebrating Iranians around the world after Khamenei's death. For as the war enters its second week and U.S. officials expect it to last several more, the White House's messaging might begin to ring hollow, former officials said. You have this euphoria, but it will wear off quickly, said David Schenker, who served as State Department's top Middle East expert in Trump's first term, likening it to the 2003 images of jubilant Iraqis tearing down statues of Saddam Hussein, and noting that it took years of U.S. planning and invasion to get there. There's always some irrational exuberance that has to be tempered with the bleak reality. Iran's risky strategy for regional war. Leaders prepared plan to escalate fighting across the Middle East by Lawrence Norman and Sun Engel Rasmussen. Emerging from a withering war with the U.S. and Israel last year, Iranian Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei and his military commanders determined that they needed a bold change in strategy. To salvage the regime in the event of Khamenei's potential assassination, they activated a high-risk and aggressive plan that is now playing out across the Middle East. Iran had for 2 years responded to foreign attacks with limited counterpunches directed at its attacker. Instead, under the new strategy, Tehran would escalate conflict across the region, especially hitting Arab Gulf states and hampering the global economy in hopes of dampening President Trump's willingness to prolong the conflict and coming back for the future one. The plan includes implementing its so-called Mosaic Defense, a decentralized approach that allows individual commanders the autonomy to keep up the fight if cut off from their superiors. Iran activated the new strategy after last June's devastating 12-day war with Israel, with its leaders determining they had made a strategic mistake. They had survived the most one-sided war they had ever fought, despite a pounding that had killed many of their top military officers, sealed their nuclear program under mountains of rubble, and wiped out many of their air defenses. But they remained trapped in a cycle of conflict with Israel and the U.S., emerging from each round weaker, more exposed, and with enemies more emboldened to strike again. Something had to change. Iranian officials started warning in October that their plans for responding to a renewed attack would be very different. They later told their neighbors privately, through the diplomatic channels, that they would be in the first line of fire if fighting resumed, Arab officials said. Ahead of the last round of nuclear talks in February, National Security Council Chief Ali Larijani passed a letter to the U.S. via Oman saying Iran would no longer respond proportionally and would react aggressively to any attack. The Americans must be aware that if they wage a war this time, it will be a regional war, Khamenei said that month, as U.S. forces massed off Iran's shores. Weeks later, Khamenei would be dead, killed in a first salvo of the war, but the strategy he launched has played out over the past week. Despite a pummeling by American and Israeli airstrikes that has strained its ability to keep shooting, Iran has managed to maintain a sweep of attacks along a 2,000-mile front, drawing a widening circle of countries and economic interests into the war. Before the end of the second day, Iranian missiles and drones had hit every country in the Gulf, followed by strikes on luxury hotels, energy facilities in multiple countries, key ports, U.S. embassies across the region, even Amazon data centers. By Thursday, the United Arab Emirates alone had been targeted by around 1,200 missiles and drones. Tehran fired a missile at a military base in Cyprus, its first ever target on European soil. The U.S. intercepted an Iranian missile headed for a military base in Turkey that holds nuclear weapons. Tehran is making a huge gamble, ramping up conflict as it tries to face down two of the world's most powerful air forces. It may fail, but if Iran's gamble works and the regime survives the bombing campaign that is grinding it down, it could give it time to regroup under Khamenei's successor. It remains unclear who will emerge as Iran's new leader. Khamenei leaves behind no apparent successor, largely by design, as he weeded out clerics that could rival his authority. Israel has said it would target the next supreme leader. President Trump has said he wants a say in who runs Iran, but the supreme leader of Iran, a country of more than 90 million people, is a vastly different position than a secular president. Iran's supreme leader is the commander-in-chief of the armed forces and the head of the judiciary, the legislature, and the executive branch. He is also the preeminent authority for the world's roughly 200 million Shia Muslims. Iran will emerge from the conflict with severely degraded land, air, and sea capabilities. Yet, Iranian security forces haven't shown signs of fracturing or large-scale defections. The domestic opposition lacks organization and arms. Tehran had lost its ability to deter its enemies since the October 7, 2023 attacks by Hamas that prompted Israel to adopt a more aggressive military posture. Iranian leaders sought to contain conflict even after the two sides began exchanging direct blows in 2024. That April, under pressure to retaliate for an Israeli strike, Iran launched hundreds of drones and missiles directly at Israel, but it intentionally telegraphed the attack, enabling Israel and the U.S. to fight it off without much damage, which kept the conflict from escalating. In another attack 6 months later, after Israel killed the leader of Iranian ally Hezbollah and Hamas leader in Tehran, Iran launched around 200 ballistic missiles at Israel, but again did little damage. The June war brought the tit-for-tat fighting to a head. Israel knocked out Iran's remaining air defenses and killed dozens of its top military officials and nuclear scientists. The U.S. joined in the fight, sending B-2 bombers and Tomahawk missiles to destroy Iran's three main nuclear sites. Iran pounded Israel with hundreds of missiles and fired 14 ballistic missiles against American bases in Iraq and Qatar. Most were intercepted and a ceasefire was reached. In October, Iranian Armed Forces Chief of Staff Major General Abdul Rahim Musavi warned that if Iran was attacked again, Tehran's response would be completely different. The key shift is that Iran embraced an expansion of the fight. Instead of focusing primarily on Israel, it would direct its firepower at the Gulf Arab monarchies that had reached a fragile détente with Tehran. The Gulf is more effectively integrated into key global supply chains than Israel. If the Gulf goes offline, the world economy will feel it, said Andreas Krieg of King's College London School of Security Studies, who has worked with Gulf militaries. Mosaic defense. Iran's first priority is survival. After Khamenei's death, it activated its so-called decentralized Mosaic defense, first announced in 2005. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps is structured into 31 command centers, one for the capital and one for each of the 30 provinces, each of which is empowered to take authority if the leadership is killed. The units are trained to fight guerrilla warfare. The Basij, a paramilitary volunteer group of hundreds of thousands of members, is embedded into neighborhoods in every town and city, including mosques, to prevent unrest. When the war came, Iran on day one hit targets across the Gulf, including in Dubai, which has prospered from its reputation as a safe haven and has become the Middle East's hub for social media influencers. Iran has escalated its attacks to oil and gas facilities. It hit the UAE oil hub of Jebel Ali, then struck the alternative loading site across the peninsula at Fujairah. It struck the key Qatari liquefied natural gas site at Ras Laffan and attacked a number of ships trying to cross the Strait of Hormuz, shipping lane for about a fifth of global oil supplies. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura refinery halted operations as a precautionary measure after an Iranian drone hit an oil station earlier this week. Iran hit a succession of U.S. embassies and consulates across the region. It continues to land hits on energy infrastructure, most of them with Shahed drones that cost roughly $35,000 to produce and many times more to shoot down. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Americans say U.S. left them stranded. State Department warning to leave the region came days after U.S. struck Iran, by Stephen Kalin and Vera Bergengruen. The war in Iran has stranded tens of thousands of Americans in the Middle East who weren't told by the U.S. government to leave until many countries in the region had closed their airspace to commercial travel amid Tehran's retaliatory barrage of missiles and drones. The State Department says 24,000 Americans have returned from the Middle East since the U.S. and Israel began launching strikes on Iran on Saturday, and that 13,000 of them had received direct assistance, including an evacuation flight that began Wednesday. We won't rest until every American who wants to leave the region is home, State Department spokesman Tommy Pijot said. We're working around the clock to make it happen. But many Americans have been unable to leave or have had to find a way home without help from their government. The British, French, Germans, and even Czech Republic were coordinating charter aircraft to get their citizens out, said Randy Manner, a retired two-star Army Major General, who said it took him days to be able to leave the United Arab Emirates. Where is the American State Department? Absolutely pathetic. The Trump administration is now faced with organizing an operation to bring Americans home in a region where missiles and drones have already been flying for days. State Department officials say the administration's cuts to the civil service haven't affected their ability to respond, but the government's handling of the situation has sparked an intense backlash. In the week leading up to the strikes, the State Department pulled some staff out of the embassies in Lebanon, Israel, and Iraq. When the war began on the morning of February 28th, local time, the State Department put out a warning about possible, quote, travel disruptions and airspace closures. Then on Monday came an announcement from Maura Namdar, the Assistant Secretary of State for Consular Affairs. Quote, depart now from the countries below using available commercial transportation due to serious safety risks, end quote. It listed Iran, Israel, and the Palestinian territories, Qatar, Bahrain, Egypt, Iraq, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanon, Oman, Saudi Arabia, Syria, and the UAE and Yemen. Secretary of State Marco Rubio announced on Tuesday that the State Department had set up a hotline for Americans seeking to leave, staffed by 120 people fielding calls at a 24/7 call center, according to state officials. Americans who called it heard an automated message telling them, please do not rely on the U.S. government, a message saying, please do not rely on the U.S. government for assisted departure or evacuation at this time. The message was later changed. The government also started to organize charter flights from the UAE, Saudi Arabia, and Jordan, with the first one departing the region on Wednesday. By Friday, several flights had landed back in the U.S. with hundreds of evacuees, officials said. Miguel Aldaso, a California native living in Qatar, tried to call the State Department hotline but said they had no information about evacuation flights. Aldaco said on Tuesday he contacted the U.S. Embassy in Doha. He said he was encouraged to leave on a commercial flight, even though airspace over much of the Persian Gulf had already been closed. No evacuation flights were planned at that time, he was told. We decided to take it upon ourselves, said Aldaco. He crowdsourced a solution through friends and WhatsApp groups, finding a driver who, for more than $1,000, took him, his wife, and their 2 children on a 7-hour journey to Saudi Arabia in an SUV. It felt like something out of Saturday Night Live, telling us to evacuate, but in the same breath saying not to expect help from the government, he said. South Carolina's Graham has long pressed president to attack Iran, by Josh Dawsey. As Lindsey Graham tried to sell Donald Trump on bombing Iran, he liked to play a little word association game with the president. Quote, "I say Franklin Roosevelt, what do you say?" the Republican senator from South Carolina asked. The correct answer? You have nothing to fear but fear itself. As he ticked through memorable presidential phrases, Graham asked Trump what his phrase would be. Trump said he didn't know. Graham, who gave him the idea, recalled. "Keep protesting. Help is on the way," Graham said, referring to Trump's January social media post urging Iranians to confront their government. Few people lobbied Trump to undertake the riskiest gamble of his presidency as effectively as the hawkish and persistent Graham, who over a decade has held a sometimes close, sometimes tumultuous relationship with Trump. Some Democrats and even Republicans point the finger at Graham, who they think goaded Trump into a Middle East conflict with little plan. Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, said there should be a law passed on how often Graham golfs with Trump. Graham's effort to pull MAGA toward regime change was, quote, the quintessential political maneuvering beyond all political maneuvering. Sitting in his Senate office this past week, Graham was almost giddy about persuading Trump to bomb Iran. One of his hats read, "Make Iran great again." "What are they going to do to me?" he said of critics who opposed his efforts. The senator said he has been talking with Trump about further military interventions in Lebanon and potentially Cuba, which he said would happen soon. He said he wasn't concerned about what was next in Iran. In the White House, some military advisors warned Trump against the conflict, a group that Graham referred to as the non-entanglement crowd. Graham said betting on Trump's second term was worth it for the president's military interventions alone. To help make the case, Graham traveled several times to Israel in recent weeks, meeting with members of the country's intelligence agency. "They'll tell me things our government won't tell me," he said. He spoke with Prime Minister Bibi Netanyahu, coaching him on how to lobby the president for action. Netanyahu showed the president intelligence that persuaded Trump to go ahead, Graham said. Graham also talked to the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman to make sure he was supportive. "I went to MBS to say, okay, I think this is going down. You good?" Representatives from the embassies of Israel and Saudi Arabia didn't provide comment. White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said Trump often hears from lawmakers and has a good and candid relationship with Graham. Graham has long wanted regime change in Iran, but has never had a president willing to go as far as Trump. So Graham decided the humiliation of their relationship was worth it. In 2015, Trump famously read Graham's cell phone number on stage after Graham called him a jackass. Graham came back to Trump in part because he wanted to shape his foreign policy thinking against isolationist figures and MAGA. Graham is realistic about Trump. He has joked with others that the Ukrainians should build a Trump Tower in Kiev if they want Trump to give more support to the country. On Iran, Graham likened Iran's leader to Adolf Hitler and told Trump that Iran was in a historically weak position. They talked about the regime's efforts to assassinate Trump in 2024. "If you think Trump forgot stuff, you'd be mistaken," Graham said. He told Trump other Republican presidents wouldn't have the courage to take on Iran and reminded Trump about ripping up Obama's Iran nuclear deal. This was Trump's moment to make history, Graham argued to the president. Graham said he first brought Iran up to Trump during the presidential transition over a round of golf, telling him Iran would always be an impediment to normalizing relations in the region. For months, Graham worked the issue, at times irritating senior White House aides. One called him an annoying, crazy uncle. He kept showing up at Trump's Florida clubs. After Trump's June Iran strikes, Graham said the president was sky high. Iran would continue to build more missiles and nuclear material, Graham told him. As other aides, including Middle East envoy Steve Witkoff, pushed talks, Graham pushed regime change. "I said, they don't want to deal. They're trying to buy a house. They're trying to burn your house down." To make the case, Graham said he worked closely with two other men, retired General Jack Keane, a Fox News contributor, and Mark Thiessen, former chief speechwriter for former President George W. Bush. The trio took turns calling the president, he said, and compared notes. Graham said that there were not a lot of other voices making the case to the president. Russia secretly shares locations of U.S. forces with Tehran. by Dustin Voles and Thomas Grove. Russia is sharing with Iran information about the locations of U.S. military forces in the Middle East that Tehran could be using to help guide its missile attacks in the region, according to U.S. officials and a former Russian intelligence officer. It is the strongest indication yet of cooperation between the two nations during the Iran conflict. The classified U.S. intelligence finding doesn't show that Russia is sharing locations with Iran explicitly for targeting purposes, but that would be a reasonable conclusion for why Russia is doing it, one of the U.S. officials said. The types of information being shared include the coordinates of U.S. military ships and aircraft, they said. The former Russian intelligence officer who had been briefed on the topic said Moscow was only giving a limited amount of intelligence information derived from its satellites to Tehran. Iran lacks a sizable fleet of its own satellites, so even minimal help could be filling a significant intelligence shortfall. The Russian embassy in Washington didn't respond to a request for comment. News of Russia providing location information to Iran was earlier reported Friday by the Washington Post. Iran has attempted to strike at U.S. forces around the Gulf region since the U.S. and Israeli military campaign began this past week. While many of its missiles have been intercepted, Iran has hit several U.S. installations, including the embassy in Riyadh and a troop base in Kuwait, as well as targets in Israel. With a majority of Russia's forces tied up in a grinding war in Ukraine, Moscow is unable to provide direct military aid to Iran. President Vladimir Putin has also been very cautious about angering President Trump, while the White House has dangled the prospect of normalizing relations with Moscow if it can reach a peace deal with Ukraine. Moscow has said it planned to stay out of the Iran conflict. "It's not our war," said Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov. Regime change in Iran would deprive Russia of its closest partner in the Middle East. The two have been united in their opposition to a U.S.-led order and are joined by security agreements. Iran provided Russia with weapons and related technologies that Moscow is deploying with lethal effect in Ukraine. Analysts say Russia also has provided Iran with some military technology. Looking at World Watch. Nigeria, militants abduct more than 300. Islamic militants attacked the town of Nagosh in northeastern Nigeria Friday, abducting more than 300 people, local officials said. A local official said the attack was likely in retaliation for an operation by the military that killed 3 commanders of the militant Boko Haram group. No one has claimed responsibility. Attacks this week also took place in 4 other areas, a military official said. Ulf Lasing with the Konrad Adenauer Foundation said Friday's attack on Nagosh took advantage of the Nigerian army's difficulties in controlling large swaths of the country where jihadi groups operate. Militants are also benefiting from increased cross-border cooperation between their groups and the use of drones to scout out their targets before attacking. The army is fighting a ghost. Fighters descending with motorbikes on villages and disappearing into the bush before the army can respond in time, Lasing said. Associated Press. Hungary. Ukraine bank staff assets seized. Hungarian authorities detained 7 employees of Ukraine's second-largest bank and confiscated more than 80 million in cash and gold they were transporting in 2 armored trucks from Austria to Ukraine through Hungary, escalating a worsening feud between the two neighbors over oil deliveries. Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban ramped up his antagonism toward Ukraine after it was slow to resume pumping oil to Hungary when a pipeline was damaged in January. The staffers at state-owned Erste Bank were briefly held Friday as they were driving the armored vehicles loaded with 35 million euros, equivalent to about 40 million, and 9 kilograms of gold bullion from Raiffeisen Bank in Austria back to Ukraine, the bank said. Hungary's National Tax and Customs Administration said the move was part of an investigation into money laundering. Erste Bank said the funds were being transported in accordance with an agreement from Raiffeisen Bank. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. U.S. likely struck school near military compound. U.S. military investigators say American forces likely were responsible for a strike that killed dozens of children at a girls' elementary school in Iran, a U.S. official said. The investigation hasn't reached conclusion, the official said. Sajara Tayyeba Girls' School in the town of Minab near the Strait of Hormuz was hit Saturday on the first day of the U.S.-Israeli air campaign in what appears to be the deadliest strike of the war. Iran said more than 160 people were killed, including children, a figure that couldn't be independently verified. The school is on the edge of a compound linked to the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a branch of Iran's armed forces, according to an analysis of images by the Wall Street Journal. There are indications the building had been used as an IRGC headquarters, the official said. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said this past week the U.S. is investigating the strike. The U.S. official cautioned the investigation was in its early stages. A U.S. Central Command spokesperson declined to comment. Reuters previously reported that U.S. officials believed it was likely responsible for the incident at the school. The U.S. hasn't publicly acknowledged its forces struck the compound. General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, said Wednesday that the U.S. carried out strikes along the southern coast of Iran. Iran has blamed the U.S. and Israel for the strike. While the U.S. and Israel are coordinating their actions in Iran, they are largely operating in different areas. An Israeli military officer said the military was looking into the school incident but wasn't aware of an Israeli strike in that area. A map released by the Pentagon shows the U.S. and Israel jointly carried out heavy strikes along Iran's coast, including near the Strait of Hormuz, where Minab is. But the map isn't precise and doesn't distinguish whose forces struck which specific places. Investigators likely will be looking for one of three kinds of mistakes that could have caused the incident: intelligence failure, munition failure, or human error, former U.S. and Israeli military officials said. The journal analysis of satellite and open source images shows the building was next to and possibly part of a compound linked to the IRGC. Fardin Nadimi, a senior fellow at the Washington Institute specializing in Iranian military, said visual clues such as the size, number, and arrangement of structures support the assessment that the site was a base, though there was little to suggest to him that it was an important one. Google Maps identified one building as a cultural complex of the IRGC, where young members play sports and train, Nadimi said. The compound also had a medical facility. A photo pinned to the location on Google Maps shows a sign reading Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy Medical Command. The school, whose name means Sacred Tree, is part of a network for the children of IRGC personnel, Nadimi and other experts said. Iran said the strike showed the U.S. is targeting civilians, which U.S. officials have denied. The Balochistan Human Rights Documentation Network said it verified the names and ages of 57 victims, including 50 students and 7 teachers. The students were between the ages of 6 and 12, the group said. Satellite images captured by Planet Labs, an American Earth observation company, before and after the strike show the school was one of the several structures on the compound that were hit, which could have contributed to the higher toll cited by officials. The images suggest the base was the intended target, but raise questions about whether the school was misidentified or accidentally struck. It could mean the strike was planned in advance against what was believed to be a military significant target, Nadimi said. Jobs data oil surge put Fed in tight spot by Nick Timiraos. The Federal Reserve's biggest fear has always been having to choose between fighting inflation and protecting jobs. Friday's employment report brought that dilemma a step closer. Just weeks ago, a solid January jobs report had raised hopes that the labor market was finding its footing after a month of fitful firing. Friday's report wilted those green shoots, showing a loss of 92,000 jobs in February and an increase in the unemployment rate to 4.4%. The readings ended optimism about stabilization and reanimated worries that the labor market has been quietly deteriorating. For Washington, the timing could hardly be worse. Fed policymakers were just beginning to grapple with new threats to energy and commodity prices following the U.S.-Israel military campaign in Iran, which has closed key global shipping lanes and threatens to shut down swaths of energy production. Let's not overreact to 1 month's numbers, but an environment in which inflation is rising and the unemployment rate is also rising, that's not any fun for the central bank, Chicago Fed President Austin Goolsbee said Friday. The report landed at an awkward moment for the White House, which has spent the past year arguing that its program of deregulation, trade deals, and tax cuts would unleash a new era of job creation. Instead, the opposite appears to be happening. Hiring has slowed, and the administration's fluid tariff program and now the military campaign in Iran have injected the kind of uncertainty that businesses cite when they stop adding workers. The Middle East conflict has raised the prospect of another bout of price increases in an economy where inflation has been above the Fed's 2% goal for 5 years. A jobs report that might otherwise have opened the door to rate cuts was instead wrapped in inflationary risk. You're going to see a spike in gasoline prices, Fed Governor Christopher Waller said on Bloomberg Television on Friday morning, before the report was released. That's what American citizens are going to see when they go to the pump, and they're going to be a little shocked. A central bank that finds itself simultaneously watching the job market weaken and inflation risks reemerge has few good options. The Fed can't easily cut rates to protect jobs without risking an acceleration in prices that are already high. It can't hold firm without risking a labor market that may be more fragile than it looks. The Fed has often treated energy shocks as temporary disruptions it can look through, riding out rather than reacting to price swings. But the central bank has faced a series of supply shocks since 2020. The pandemic, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the administration's tariff program, and now the war in Iran. That could limit the Fed's flexibility if it worries about another short-term rise in prices creating knock-on effects. This is now potentially an echo of Russia invading Ukraine, Minneapolis Fed President Neil Kashkari said Monday. He referred to the Fed's misjudgment in 2021 when it dismissed a surge in inflation as likely to be temporary. If this ends up being another commodity shock around the world, do we really want to do another transitory 2.0? Some analysts cautioned that the headline number in the payroll report was depressed by labor strikes in the health sector, suggesting the underlying picture may be somewhat less dire. But even stripping that out, hiring has been weak in recent months, underscoring that the softness is neither new nor narrow. DOJ says Epstein file mistakenly withheld by Sadie Gurman. The Justice Department said it released some Epstein files that had been mistakenly withheld, including FBI documents detailing a woman's unverified allegations of sexual misconduct against President Trump. A review found that the documents that referenced Trump were incorrectly marked as duplicates, one of 4 categories under which the law allowed the department to withhold or redact files, officials said. After this was brought to our attention, we reviewed the entire batch with similar coding and discovered 15 documents were incorrectly coded as duplicative, the Justice Department said in a social media post. Or duplicative, I should say. It also released 5 prosecution memos from the Epstein investigation in the Southern District of Florida that reviewers had initially withheld as privileged. The newly released files include Federal Bureau investigation notes documenting a series of interviews the woman gave to agents in 2019 in which she alleged she was abused by Trump and Jeffrey Epstein when she was a minor in the 1980s. They also include an intake form documenting the initial call to the FBI's threat center from a friend relaying the claims. The Wall Street Journal reviewed copies of the documents earlier this past week. Trump has denied wrongdoing and said the Epstein files totally exonerated him. The Justice Department included a summary of the woman's allegations when it released millions of Epstein files in January, and a so-called Form 302 from her first interview in which she alleged Epstein abused her in in South Carolina. But it hadn't released 3 other Form 302s, including the interviews in which she discussed Trump, raising questions about why they weren't made public as required under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. As we have consistently done, if any member of the public reported concerns with information in the library, the department would review, make any corrections, and republish online, the department said. Justice Department officials have come under sustained criticism for their handling of the files, including inconsistent redactions that expose the names of dozens of Epstein victims and initially kept some prominent men's names hidden. U.S. News. Well, that's U.S. News too. How Mullen got the call to replace Noem. Oklahoma senator is a Trump whisperer who's as pugnacious as existing DHS head, by Lindsay Wise and Maggie Severance. And there's an image of Senator Markwayne Mullin speaking to reporters on Thursday with the dome of the Capitol in the background. President Trump's pick to replace Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is a former mixed martial arts fighter who has spent years as a Trump whisperer, talking to the president by his own account all the time. Trump announced his plans to nominate Senator Markwayne Mullin, Republican from Oklahoma, on Thursday as he pushed Noem out as leader of the department. In choosing Mullin, the president selected someone as pugnacious as Noem for the job, which oversees immigration and customs enforcement, and signaled he doesn't plan to back off his signature immigration tactics. Markwayne is a fighter, right? Literally and figuratively, and a proven fighter in the Senate, proven fighter in the House, said Representative Brian Mast, a Republican from Florida. And I think that's why the president chose him. Mullin, aged 48, has been a vehement defender of Trump's border policies and an outspoken advocate for the administration's foreign policy and national security agenda. He has also been a go-between in talks between the White House and the congressional Republicans. Still, most senators were blindsided by Trump's decision to tap Mullin. Senator Eric Schmidt, Republican from Missouri, said he found out about it during Senate Republicans' closed-door lunch when a colleague showed him a post online. Mullin told reporters that he found out moments before they did. "I got to be honest, I wasn't expecting the call today," he said. Mullin has signaled openness to working with Democrats, who had demanded Noem's ouster and have held up DHS funding over the president's immigration enforcement practices. "I'm going to be very open and honest with them," he told reporters. "I'm not going to get in a tit for tat, but if they have real concerns, I'm going to listen to them." Mullin relishes talking to the scrums of reporters on Capitol Hill and sometimes wears his cowboy hat on the chamber floor, pushing the limits of the dress code. He is perhaps best known for his fitness. He leads bipartisan 6:30 a.m. workouts in the House gym, where politics talk is forbidden, and is in the Oklahoma Wrestling Hall of Fame. He is also known for his willingness to pick a fight. In 2023, he confronted a witness during a Senate committee hearing. Mullin read insulting tweets that Teamsters President Sean O'Brien had written about him. "You want to run your mouth?" Mullin said to O'Brien. "Stand your butt up, then." Mullin then stood as if to fight. "Sit down, you're a United States Senator," implored Committee Chairman Bernie Sanders from Vermont. Born in 1977 in Tulsa, Mullin dropped out of college to take over his father's plumbing business at age 20. He first ran for Congress during the Tea Party era, pitching himself as a political outsider. He had a leg up in the race because his business regularly ran TV ads featuring him. First elected to the House in 2012 and the Senate in 2022, Mullin is known as an eager negotiator who has a knack for getting close to leadership and inside the room where decisions are made. He was one of the first senators to publicly endorse Senator John Thune of South Dakota in his successful bid for Senate Majority Leader, and worked doggedly to help reconcile Thune with Trump ahead of the 2024 election. In Trump's second term, Mullin has pushed to help confirm nominees and rally support for the president's legislative priorities. He's been one of those senators who has been a really good liaison between the whole Congress and the White House, said Senator Lisa Murkowski, a Republican from Alaska. "I've seen his shuttle diplomacies." Mullen helped negotiate a crucial piece of the Republican tax and spending law that Trump signed last year, the $40,000 cap on state and local tax deductions. That issue didn't matter to Oklahoma, but Mullen was the person who navigated between senators, some of whom wanted a low cap, and his former House colleagues from New York and New Jersey who wanted a higher cap. Mullen's stronger will and vigorous defense of Trump and his agenda have earned him many MAGA allies, but he also has some critics. While Mullen's confirmation is considered likely, he needs 51 votes in chamber. The GOP controls 53 to 47. A few of his Republican colleagues were less than enthusiastic Thursday when asked about his nomination. Senator Rick Scott, Republican from Florida, would only say twice, "I think Kristi Noem has done a good job." And Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin, didn't respond when asked if he would vote to confirm his colleague. Scott, whose Senate leadership bid has been opposed by Mullen, later posted a statement on social media saying Mullen will be a strong leader at DHS. Mullen might have to smooth things over with Senator Rand Paul, Republican from Kentucky, who will preside over his confirmation hearing. Last month, an Oklahoma journalist quoted Mullen calling Paul a snake for breaking with the party on key votes. In an apparent reference to a 2017 incident when a neighbor broke Paul's ribs in a dispute over yard waste, Mullen added, "I understand completely why his neighbor did what he did, and I told him that to his face." Neither Mullen's nor Paul's office responded to requests for comment. Democratic Senator Chris Coons of Delaware said he approached Mullen after he heard the news Thursday. Coons said he warned him that he wouldn't support a DHS that violated human rights, the law, or the Constitution. "We can keep people safe without resorting to those things," he said. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Turning now to the opinion section of the Wall Street Journal, declarations by Peggy Noonan. There's reason to worry about the Iran war. Thoughts on Iran have to begin with the awe we feel, again, for the U.S. military. Its professionalism, cool, and courage are impressive and inspiring. And we must give Donald Trump his due. His decision was bold. He took a big swing. The end of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and scores of his colleagues in a hellish rule isn't bad news for the world, but good, as is what looks to be inevitable damage to or even possible ending of its nuclear program. You've got to hope it's all going to succeed, that it will make America's position an inch or two better in the world and not an inch or two worse, that a violent regime will be replaced by something better, safer. But it's a gamble, a huge one, and we'll find out if it was a reckless one. Of course, it is a war. We are bombing a sovereign nation, and having killed its leaders, we've sunk much of the Iranian fleet. This isn't a situation that lends itself to phrases like limited series of strikes. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth had said could take 3 weeks, maybe 8. You don't know when you launch something like this how and when it ends. Quickly, on Mr. Hegseth, someone has to calm him down. He's supposed to be trying to get the world to see the wisdom of the administration's actions. Instead, he's something between an excitable morning TV anchor and the rooster who thought he brought the dawn. We're playing for keeps. We're punching them while they're down. He brags about our lethality. He stopped talking like that. Don't feed the stereotypes. Don't tempt the gods. Should Congress debate the war seriously and at length? Yes, of course. That's its job. We are a republic. Stick with it, with its forms, delineations, and responsibilities. Half of Congress is useless. Half of Congress is always useless, but it's what we've got. The argument for the war is serious. For almost half a century, Iran's government has been causing violent trouble in the world. It has been increasing its production of weaponry. It has long vowed death to America and Israel. And after the June bombing of its nuclear installations and the crushing of December and January street protests, it is seriously weakened. So move. Mr. Trump first won the presidency with fiery denunciations of illegal immigration and forever wars. He doesn't like war, but he looks to have grown to like sparks, and he's had a lot of recent good fortune with the use of force. When he first bombed Iran, that country did little in response. When he moved on Venezuela, plucking its ruler from his bed, there was no blowback. It's possible this has left him thinking the world's bad guys are a Potemkin village, that they talk big but fold quickly. But is that true? He is gambling when he thinks he's on a winning streak. Iran's government ducked and covered through the June bombings, but now they will fight to keep from losing everything. It's hard to imagine the regime's death throes. If it comes to that, will be pretty. It's hard to imagine the regime's death throes, if it comes to that, will be pretty. It isn't fear-mongering to think about potential harrowing repercussions to the U.S. actions, which could include a widening war in the Mideast, a broadening and escalation of hostilities, the dragging in of U.S. allies, and a drain on our armaments becoming a provocation to potential adversaries, a terrorist strike or strike from Iranian operatives or non-state actors, oil spikes, an energy shock. 20% of the world's oil goes through the Strait of Hormuz. Many in the military services and possibly civilians may be casualties. Here is what I infer of the president's logic. The bombing has a good chance of slowing or stopping Iran's nuclear ballistic missile and drone programs. It will certainly degrade and damage Iran's infrastructure, standing mystique. The country will be diminished. If its leaders are killed, so be it. If those who replace them are better, good. If they are just as bad or worse, at least they will be operating in reduced circumstances. They'll be forced to turn to rebuilding their country. They might therefore be diverted from arms making, at least for a while. And if down the road they act up in harmful ways, they will know in the back of their minds that the U.S. may move on them again. This may moderate their decisions and actions. I infer because Mr. Trump has given many reasons for his decisions. This is not reassuring. He's offering varying explanations for going forward. He has a feeling, or Israel was going to move anyway, and in the end, whatever happens is what he'll say he wanted. If there's a regime change, that was his intention all along. If there isn't, it wasn't what he was looking for. The hope for an armed uprising by the Iranian people strikes me as absurd. They don't have arms. They live in a police state. The Ayatollahs have operated with Mao's understanding that power comes out of the barrel of a gun. The Journal reports that Israel targeted not only Iranian missile and drone sites, but the nation's police state apparatus, including the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps headquarters in Tehran, in hope of clearing the way for a popular revolt. Could that happen? People who have lived under a dictatorship for almost half a century are forced to survive and rise People who have lived under a dictatorship for almost half a century are forced to survive and rise within a sick system. Those most likely to oppose the religio-fascist state that oppressed them would likely lack the street fervor of street Islamists. When your country is being bombed and your cousin's neighborhood hit, the impulse is to defend your land and shake your fist at the bombers. U.S. polls so far aren't supportive of the president's decision. What might be behind the reservations? The administration's communication of its thinking could, it's true, be substantially improved. Formal, detailed explanations of official thinking are needed in situations like this. But they aren't magic. George W. Bush's address on the decision to go into Iraq were regular and substantive, but they couldn't make that war succeed. No one outside Iran likes its regime. Most Americans would believe it is a danger to us, that it wishes us ill, that it has thrived on terror and oppression. The government of the mullahs has no serious constituency here. But after Afghanistan and Iraq, people think America is snakebit in the Middle East, that nothing dramatic will likely work. Small incremental moves might help in the diplomatic day-to-day, but moving militarily on the Middle East country? No. We're snakebit. If I were in Congress, would I vote right now to support the administration's action in Iran? I think not, due to the severity of some of the possible repercussions outlined above. It is possible that thinking is unimaginative, too dead to the urgency of the moment. The fact is, You only know on something like this in retrospect. Right now, we're waiting for that in retrospect to occur. That is an uncomfortable place to be in. And finally, review and outlook. A Friday economic panic attack. Washington's pessimist caucus is always on duty, and the members had a good Friday as oil prices climbed and the Labor Department said the economy lost jobs in February. Equities fall again on the bad news, but none of this is a cause for a panic attack. There's no denying the February report was lousy. The U.S. shed 92,000 jobs and revised down gains for January and December by a combined 69,000. The question is what to make of the declines. The first point to understand is that the jobs report is unrelated to the Iran war, though Democrats want to link the two. The labor household and employer surveys took place mid-month before the bombing began. Some 28,000 of the job losses came in healthcare, but that owes largely to union labor actions. Other industries that shed jobs include leisure and hospitality, 27,000, manufacturing, 12,000, construction, 11,000, and motion picture production, 9,500. The monthly job data has been noisy lately, and the household survey was less gloomy. That survey showed the number of workers employed part-time for economic reasons declined by some 1 million over the past 2 months, and the unemployment rate has remained more or less steady at 4.4%, around what it was in 2017. The ADP payroll report and the Institute for Supply Management Services report this week both showed job growth last month, so go figure. The labor market has been cooling, with healthcare and social assistance driving most gains. The causes are diffuse. Job growth notably stalled after President Trump began his tariff barrage last April, which created economic uncertainty and raised business costs. His immigration raids have reduced the supply of workers, especially in construction. Many employers say that an aging population and skills gaps make it hard to find workers in the trades. Rising productivity, 2.8% in the last year, may also mean employers need fewer workers and could explain why wage growth has remained strong despite a slowdown in hiring. Average hourly wages rose 0.4% last month and are up 3.8% in the past year. As for the other cause of Friday's anxiety, crude oil prices took a big jump to above $93 a barrel. The cause is shipping disruptions through the Strait of Hormuz from the fighting in the Persian Gulf region. Kuwait said that it may have to throttle production as its oil storage facilities fill up, and other producers may also do so temporarily. Qatar, which wants the war to end fast, fed the angst by saying prices could go to $150 a barrel. Prices will rise further the longer the conflict continues, and Americans will see higher gasoline prices at the pump for a while. But to put current prices in a non-panicky perspective, Brent crude traded above $90 a barrel for most of 2022 after Russia's Ukraine invasion and exceeded $100 a barrel from 2011 to 2014. Neither price surge led to a recession. Prices will come down assuming shipping bottlenecks ease. The threat level in the Persian Gulf has already declined somewhat with fewer Iranian missile and drone attacks, and Mr. Trump has said the U.S. Navy will escort oil tankers if necessary. Stopping the flow of oil is part of the Iran regime's war strategy to cause enough political pain in the Gulf and the U.S. that Mr. Trump and Israel stop the bombing. But that is all the more reason not to panic at a temporary price surge and press ahead to remove Iran's missile and drone stockpiles and assembly lines and the regime's brutal enforcers. Oh, and if Mr. Trump wants a tax cut boost for the economy while the war continues, he could call off his new 15% universal tariff. Consider it our contribution to easing everyone's economic anxiety. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Saturday-Sunday, March 7th and 8th issue of the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition. We read from the Wall Street Journal Weekend Edition every Monday at 7 a.m. Your reader has been Dan. Thank you for listening.
You're listening to the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Volunteer radio readers broadcast daily readings, 24 hours a day, of newspapers, magazines, books, and other printed matter to area people who are blind or have a print disability, who are provided reading radios. The Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service has broadcast almost 40 years of radio readings to those without sight. Our broadcast signal is provided at no charge by WNED. Radio Reading Studios are at 1199 Harlem Road in Cheektowaga. For more information on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, the following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability.